Hey guys, Ian here, and I have a quick question for you. Have you ever wondered why people tend to struggle when it comes to weight loss? They feel like they've tried everything but nothing works. Why do you think it's so difficult for some people when others can make it look so easy? The answer is that most people are taught how to handle the practical side of weight loss, such as exercising more and eating less, but they aren't taught how to handle the mental and emotional side of weight loss. That said, in this video, I'm going to go over the top 5 most effective tips for how you can handle the mental and emotional side of weight loss. Of course, this will only be useful if you've ever struggled with weight loss in the first place. So if you're not one of those people, then you might want to go do something else. Now, let's get into the first tip, which doesn't actually require you to do anything. You just have to understand something. And that is understanding what gets you started with weight loss versus what keeps you going. Now, you've probably heard of the terms extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation before, but I'll just give you a quick refresher. External motivation means you're motivated by an external source. For example, you want a six-pack because it makes you look good in front of other people. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, means you're more motivated by a deeper sense of enjoyment, such as playing tennis. It means your motivation comes from within pretty much. Now, when you first get started with weight loss, you'll notice that you tend to start with external motivation, such as wanting to look good in front of others. And to be honest, that's perfectly okay. That's pretty much the reason why almost everyone gets started, because they want to look good in front of other people. For this reason, external motivators are extremely powerful with getting you started. The problem with it is that it tends to only last for so long. This is because external motivators need constant fuel to survive, and that fuel can only come from other people consistently lavishing you with praise. This is why you might see some really fit people constantly post on Instagram. It's because they need to keep refueling their validation in order to keep going. And sure, some people do it out of vanity, but for the most part, external motivation needs constant validation in order to keep going. And while it's very effective, it also makes you somewhat vulnerable. Because if you ever stop getting that validation or ever figure that it's just not worth it, then you're going to drop everything and just give up. With that said, if you're just starting out and don't really have anything to show off, then you're going to have to rely on internal motivation at some point. And while internal motivation doesn't do a very good job with getting people started, it does a great job with keeping people going. Because internal motivation means you find enjoyment in the activity itself. And this happens because you start to develop a sense of identity and purpose with what you're doing. Now, the weird thing with internal motivation is that you have to become proud of something that you can't see, and it's usually something you can't really show off. This almost goes against the very nature of things, because didn't you want to get fit in the first place so you could show off to other people? It sure wasn't because of your love for lettuce. That said, this paradigm shift in your mind tends to cause you to change on the inside, and because you've changed on the inside, your world starts to change on the outside. And the only way to even find your internal motivation to begin with is not to ask what other people want from you, but rather, what do you want for yourself? With that said, this leads us into tip number 2, which is understanding the difference between what's achievable with weight loss versus what's maintainable. Now, when it comes to weight loss, any change from what you're used to eating will feel really weird. And to make things more difficult, there will almost always be a tremendous amount of relief whenever someone starts eating the high-calorie foods they used to eat before their diet started. This is why most diets tend to fail, because it instills the idea that in order to get fit, you need to give up your favorite foods for the rest of your life. And while you might need to forego some comfort in order to achieve your goal, I don't think anyone really likes the idea of having to give up their favorite foods for the rest of their life. I can personally tell you that having a six-pack is not worth giving up your favorite foods forever, but the good news is that you don't really have to. You just have to try and find a balance, which is where what's achievable with weight loss versus what's maintainable comes into play. See, what most people tend to do when starting out on their weight loss journey is set a goal weight for themselves. They then go on a diet for some time before eventually giving up because they've deprived themselves of their favorite food for so long. Now, to prevent this from happening, don't just start by trying to diet to your goal weight right away. Instead, pretend you're at your goal weight right now and practice what your life will be like. Because once you reach your goal weight, you'll usually want to stay within a 5-pound range in order to maintain it. But if you can't control your weight range where you're at now, then you won't be able to control yourself when you're at a lower body fat either. The good news is that if you can maintain this at a higher body fat percentage, then the chances are once you do reach your goal weight, you'll be much more likely to maintain it as opposed to yo-yoing back to your original diet like most people do. Because you'll have built your foundation on maintenance well ahead of time. So pretend you're already at your goal weight right now and need to find a mix of healthy foods while also incorporating your favorite foods. And do this until you can reliably control your weight weight range within 5 pounds. Because if you can do this, you'll not only find a way to maintain your weight, but you'll also find a way to lose it when you need to. You won't just have something that's achievable, you'll have something that's maintainable. Now, this leads us into tip number 3, which is understanding how time slows down when you're on a diet. This point is really important and strangely something I haven't really seen anyone talk about, and I'm not sure why. Because when you start going on a diet, most people don't notice this, but time tends to slow down somewhat dramatically. Or rather, your perception of time tends to change. Don't believe this can be a thing? Well, let me ask you this. Of the 2 scenarios I'm about to tell you, both of which are 30 minutes long, which one would feel longer to you? Watching Netflix for 30 minutes or watching water in a pan for 30 minutes waiting for it to boil? This should be easy to answer. Of course, watching Netflix for 30 minutes is going to be fun and go by quickly, whereas waiting 30 minutes for water in a pan to start boiling, however, is going to drag on forever. Now, the interesting thing here is that watching the water should technically take less mental energy to do, but it's actually more mentally draining. This is because when we concentrate on how long something is taking, time tends to go by much more slowly than we would like. You've probably already experienced this if you've ever stared at a clock before. Now, the problem with this phenomenon in general is that we don't realize that the flow of time tends to change after we start dieting. We often optimistically tell ourselves we can manage dieting if it's only for 30 days or so. But when you're committing to something like weight loss, you're also committing to longer days essentially. This often catches people off guard and makes it feel like it's taking too long to lose all the weight. But it's not because it's actually taking so long, but rather because you're so focused on time in the first place. As I mentioned in a previous video, any goal you set for yourself is like planting a seed. You can choose to plant the seed of anything you want, but it will only grow on its timeline and not yours. Now, the first step towards fixing all this is just to be aware how time slows down in general and take it into account. Because when you're on vacation, for example, your days go by like minutes, but when you're on a diet, it feels like your days go on forever. That said, a really easy way to fix this is to not set a due date for when you need to lose your weight by. I know this sounds completely opposite to what most people might tell you to do, but hear me out. Because setting a due date for your weight loss goal seems like a good idea initially, like it's something to hold yourself accountable, but it actually makes things worse for you. And there are 2 reasons for this. For the first, let's say you want to get fit by summer, for example. By incorporating a due date, you're actually just slowing down time for yourself, because you become so focused on the goal date that every second that goes by feels like it just drags on forever. Not only that, but you'll find yourself feeling frustrated because things aren't moving as fast as you'd like them to. The second reason why setting a due date is bad for you is because it sets the idea that there's going to be an end to your new lifestyle. Think about it. What happens when that day comes and you no longer have something to look forward to? A satisfied need has no reason to continue motivating your actions, so you'll probably just stop even if you do get there. Now, something I should mention is that you can actually use this slowdown effect to your advantage. For example, when I'm eating right and losing weight, I'll only look at the number on the scale every 7 days, because this tends to make the weeks go by much faster. But if I know that I'm overeating, then I'll look at the number on the scale on purpose just to slow down time and be aware of what I'm doing, because most people tend to gain weight when they aren't paying attention. So in summary for this point, just understand that time tends to go by much more slowly when you're dieting, but it doesn't have to be this way. To prevent this from happening, try not to set a goal date for yourself and try not to become so focused on your day-to-day weight, because both of these things will leave you feeling frustrated when the change you want doesn't come fast enough according to your expectations. And it's going to feel like you're staring at a clock just waiting for time to move faster, when it's actually going to have the opposite effect and make time go by more slowly. Now, with that said, let's jump into tip number 4, which affects a lot of people, and that's how to manage eating out of boredom. Of course, eating out of boredom doesn't sound so bad on the surface, but it can actually be someone's primary cause for gaining weight, because you think you're hungry all the time, but you're actually just starving for stimulation. But what is boredom really? Boredom is a form of frustration from not getting the stimulation you crave. You get frustrated because you have an expectation from something that won't live up to it. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're not doing anything, because you can still be busy at work and still find it very boring. If you're bored, it means you aren't enjoying where you're at right now, and it can often be mistaken for mental fatigue. For example, if you haven't really been doing anything, but you feel like you don't really have any energy, then it usually means you're just bored. And this is generally caused by repetition or lack of interest due to something being predictable. Essentially, boredom is your mind's way of telling you you should be doing something else. But this can often be a problem because that something else can usually mean go out and eat something even when you're not hungry. And the biggest problem with weight loss isn't necessarily the hunger pains, it's what comes with it, and that's the sense of boredom that you're feeling. Because you aren't eating all the fun foods you once did, you just find that life isn't as engaging as it once was. Now, some people tend to mistake this feeling of boredom for stress, when it's really just a combination of severe boredom and the frustration that you get from a lack of stimulation. So, how do you deal with the boredom that you might be feeling? The answer is that you just have to accept boredom for what it is. You have to, because that's just reality. The things that are boring in life are rarely ever going to be interesting, and this goes for boring foods too. The good news is that when you accept it for what it is and stop trying to seek stimulation from it, you start to feel a whole lot better on the inside, because you realize that you don't have to change anything, and that thought will help make you feel more at peace inside. And this leads us into the final and most important tip, and this is something that almost everyone struggles with, and that's how to handle emotional eating. Now, talking about emotional eating is a tricky subject because there are so many different potential causes. Stress, anxiety, boredom, depression are all potential sources for why people tend to overeat when they're emotionally distressed. To get started, I'm going to say something that we just have to admit is true, and it's that food is almost always comforting, regardless of who you are or what stress you might have in your life. It's just a fact that we as human beings tend to be drawn to food just because it makes us feel so good. Now, if you tend to find yourself emotionally eating at times, then you need to stop and ask yourself, what is it that you're really hungry for? Because until you do that, breaking the habit of emotional overeating will be a never-ending battle. With that said, when this happens, most people don't realize that they're really just craving comfort more than anything else. You're not necessarily seeking to be full, you're seeking to be fulfilled. Because here's the thing, you really can't just ignore your thoughts or your emotions. Your emotions do need an outlet of some sort. But with that said, have you ever noticed something interesting about stress eating or emotional eating? Why is it that when we're feeling stressed that we're always drawn to things that are high in carbs or sugar? Things like pizza or ice cream. You never really see someone go, man, I'm stressed. I could really eat a ton of lettuce right now. This is because things like carbs and sugar tend to provide instant satisfaction, which shows that you're really craving happiness and not hunger. It's like having a button you can press that will instantly make you happy whenever you press it. Not only is it immediate, but it takes little to no effort on your part. And let's be real, vegetables probably won't ever make you as happy as carb or sugar-based foods. This leaves you with two options. You either have to identify and get rid of the cause of the stress, or you have to find another outlet. Regarding the first solution, many times the problem isn't necessarily what you're eating, because what you're eating is really just a coping mechanism for what's really bothering you deep down, and that's stress. Now, eating while you're stressed makes sense for many reasons, because it gives you energy and it makes you feel a whole lot better. And I'm not gonna pretend that this isn't the case. But with that said, if you really feel stressed all the time, then maybe you should reevaluate your current situation. Because while you might not be able to change everything, there might be some options you hadn't considered before. And I know some people are so stressed right now that they can't even find the time or the energy to even think about fixing the stress. And if that's the case for you, one thing you can do is by finding foods that aren't super high in calories but still satisfy the craving. It's not a perfect solution, and you might even still gain some weight, but at least it'll be a step in the right direction. Just be careful, because anything you do buy, you will eventually eat. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but you will eventually eat them. As for the second solution of finding another outlet for your emotions, this one's a bit tricky. The most common solutions people tend to give are like, oh, just go for a walk, or just go exercise and you'll feel better. Let me just say that these solutions usually don't work for me personally. The problem is that these things usually don't work, and it's because they don't even compare to eating at all. If eating requires no effort and relieves your stress right away, then your replacement's gonna have to be somewhat similar, because quitting a pleasurable habit is hard, but replacing it with something unpleasant is even harder. Continuing on this thought, eating gives you instant gratification, which gives you the illusion of having control over your life, if only for a moment. You tell yourself, I might not have what I want right now, but I can choose to have this thing for dinner. The problem with this thinking is that you're usually trying to satisfy an unidentified craving, but nothing ever seems to satisfy it, so you'll continue to keep eating until you do. It's like you turn into a werewolf when the moon comes out, causing you to suddenly change and go on a rampage. And the next morning, you look at yourself in the mirror to see the damage and wonder, what have I done? Now, the first thing you can do when when this happens is to try to at least be mindful of it. Even if you still do end up eating a lot, at least acknowledge that it's not because you're hungry or in need of food. You're really just seeking comfort. This will help you take back some control from the hungry beast inside of you. The second thing is that this doesn't have to be an all or nothing scenario. If you feel like you need to eat something, then at least let it be a protein bar as opposed to eating a large meal. Because your ultimate goal is not to ignore the bad feelings you have, but to find something else to indulge in instead. You have to find something that you enjoy doing when the stress starts to build up. And again, whatever you do choose would have to be somewhat equivalent to the benefits you'd get from eating. This means that you need self-care options that provide you quick gratification and take little effort. Things like taking a bath, getting a massage, eating healthier snacks, etc. You can also combine these things to make them more powerful. For example, say you take a bath and bring some chocolate with you. The bath will help you relax while you're enjoying your chocolate, but it also limits your ability to get more snacks because you're already wet in the tub and in a comfortable position. With that said, I'd suggest you look at emotional overeating like it's a finger trap, because sometimes the more you try to fight your problems and negative thoughts, the more trapped you become. All our stress, anxiety, and cravings instinctively causes us to want to pull away, because we naturally want to get away from the bad feeling. But not all problems need to be fought head on in order to feel better. Some problems can be overcome by not trying too hard to solve them and instead accepting them for what they are. Because by letting yourself relax, you'll notice that there's much less tension and that you are actually free from the problem all along. And sure, the problem might still physically exist in reality, but mentally speaking, you'll be free of its control. Now, you might be wondering, did I really buy a pack of finger traps on Amazon just to make a point? Well, maybe, but I guess we'll never know. And that's everything. Now, if you feel like this video helped you out, feel free to drop a like and consider subscribing, because I'll be covering off on more content like this in the future. Also, feel free to comment below with any advice or thoughts that you might have. With that said, I'll see you in the next video.